Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, keys to the game for this Georgia program, heading into what I think is a fascinating week one matchup against this Clemson team. And you look at this matchup, we ran the same exact episode for this Clemson team on Tuesday night, taking a look at some of the things that, they might be able to do to give Georgia some problems, which was inherently a very hard episode to execute because Georgia doesn't have that many problems. Now we're looking at it from a Georgia standpoint. And I think there are a lot more talking points for this Georgia program where you look at Clemson and say there are some aspects of this Clemson team, specifically that front seven, that I think are legit. Yeah, I've been pretty vocal. I think Clemson's front seven might be a top 10, maybe even top 5 unit that you see in the country. That being said, I don't think they are as complete of a football team that Georgia is. And I think there are things Georgia can do that probably have a little bit more success in this football game. Want to take a look at some of those things that Georgia might be able to do. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Georgia fans, it's been a blast talking this program. The amount of support y'all continue to show to the boys, it's been amazing. We appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with this Georgia team on defense and what does Clemson want to do? What did they have a lot of success doing in 2023? And I think this is part of the biggest question mark you have for this Clemson program. In the Clemson passing attack, they were extremely one-dimensional. When you take a look at the throwing chart for Cade Klubnik last year, over 60% of his throws on dropbacks went to the middle of the field, specifically in those short intermediate portions. Then you look at the boundary or you look at the deeper third. I mean, Cade Klubnik, 9% of his throws went 20-plus yards down the field. This Clemson offense just didn't show that ability to attack every single blade of grass on the football field. Now, we expect this to be better for Clemson in 2024. I think they have more talented wide receivers. They're finally healthy. They brought in a couple of true freshmen. That being said, if you're George and you're looking at how can we take away and make Cade Klubnik as uncomfortable as we can, you're probably focusing on that short, intermediate, middle part of the football field. And I think for Georgia, you kind of feel good about it, right? You have 2, 3, maybe even 4 freaky athletic off-ball linebackers. So you talk about dropping them back into those shallow coverages. Those guys, whether it's man, whether it's zone, they can operate in space. And I think Jonel Aguero might be one of the most important players in this football game where look at Clemson. Not only do they like to attack that short intermediate part of the football field, but I think more importantly, you look at their go-to wide receivers, their difference makers, their proven difference makers on the offensive side of the football. It's tight end Jake Bringstool, it's wide receiver Antonio Williams, and it's wide receiver Tyler Brown. And so you look at Cade Klubnik wanting to work towards those kind of pass catchers. Jonel Aguero is going to have a lot of responsibility to deal with some of those guys. I think that is probably the biggest key for this Georgia defense, because you look on the boundary and say, one, I like Clemson's boundary wide receivers in terms of the physical traits, right? Adam Randall, I think, is a freaky wide receiver going into year 3. They got 2 true freshmen coming in, and Brian Wesco and TJ Moore, that are big, long, and fast. There are some boundary wide receivers that, although haven't necessarily put it all on the football field during their collegiate careers, I think they're capable. That being said, I look at Georgia in that boundary cornerback position and say you probably like their matchup. So if you're looking at taking away what I think Cade Klubnik wants to do the most, you're probably leaving your boundary cornerbacks on islands, asking them to match up against guys like Adam Randall, a true freshman TJ Moore, successfully on the boundary. And then you're kind of squeezing down with your safeties and trying to take away that short intermediate portion of the football field. And when you have talented linebackers like Georgia clearly does, I think you can have a lot of success doing that. Now, I think second, you got to take away Cade's legs. This is a game that, Clemson was hesitant to run Cade Klubnik a lot in 2023. And it makes sense. Cade is a very good athlete, but he's not necessarily the biggest quarterback. Kind of like J.J. McCarthy last year when Michigan asked J.J. McCarthy to run the football. There was some success that was had, but you don't want to ask him to run the football a lot because he's not necessarily the biggest body, most durable quarterback. I think a lot of those same things can be said about Cade. But if you do look at this matchup, I think Clemson is going to have to use Cade's legs, whether it's in the read option game, whether it's getting him outside the pocket. That's when Cade is most comfortable. And so I think if you're Georgia, you have to, for lack of better terms, figure out how you're going to deal with that. I go back to the SEC championship game against Alabama where Georgia clearly had a game plan to deal with Jalen Milroe's legs, but I felt like it kind of took away from letting that Georgia defensive line really kind of let it loose and impact the football game. And it was pretty clear that they kind of came into that game saying, hey, we're not going to pin our ears back and get after Jalen Milroe. We're just going to try to keep him in the pocket. I think they had some sort of success, but I also think at the same time it took away the one of, if not the biggest asset to this Georgia defense over the last 5 years, and that is a smothering defensive line that can take over football games. How I'm dealing with Cade Klubnik, it is not necessarily trying to keep him in the pocket. I'm probably trusting my linebackers to act as quarterback spies, and I think that's something that Georgia can lean into. You look at C.J. Allen or Munden or Raylan Wilson, those are linebackers that are extremely athletic in space. And Cade Klubnik, although a very good athlete, is no Jalen Milroe. I like C.J. Allen or Munden or Raylan Wilson playing as that quarterback spy, kind of making plays on Cade Klubnik when he decides to get out of the pocket, as opposed to, telling the Jalen Walker or Damon Wilson or Mikael Williams to not really get after the passer. And so I think Georgia needs to have a plan to deal with Cade Klubnik's legs. But I think the biggest problem with their plan against Alabama was they just kind of took away that edge they had on the defensive line because they didn't really ask their defensive lineman to pin the ears back and get after the quarterback. So have a plan for Cade Klubnik. I think that has to be with your linebackers, probably acting as quarterback spies. That's kind of probably what I'm looking at for Georgia on defense. And you flip over to the offensive side of the football, the biggest question mark we have for Clemson coming into this game is the secondary. And not that the secondary is bad, but the secondary is extremely young. And on top of that, they were already going to be young heading into 2024. You look at guys like Shelton Lewis or Avian Terrell or Khalil Barnes, all guys that will be true sophomores. You look at some of these guys coming out of fall camp, Jaden Lucas, not sure if he's going to go. He was probably the veteran in the cornerback room being a true junior. And then you look at Shelton Lewis, also question marks if he's going to play. There is a very real possibility that Clemson trots out at times true freshmen at the cornerback position. And if you're Georgia, how can you go attack that? We know Clemson's going to play a lot of one high safeties, a lot of man coverage, whether it's pick plays, whether it's kind of forcing Clemson to pass off wide receivers, whatever that is, that's what I don't get paid the big bucks to do. You know you're going to get a lot of man coverage, and you might see a lot of young Clemson cornerbacks. Can you take advantage of some of those matchups is probably the question you're looking for. And I think this Georgia wide receiver room and what Kirby Smart has done in the transfer portal, they're better equipped to do it, right? Dominic Lovett is a phenomenal man beater in the slot. Then you look at Colby Young or London Humphreys, guys that can work vertically down the field. When you do get that matchup against a young cornerback, can you take advantage and create an explosive play? And again, Kirby Smart went to the transfer portal to add some of these guys because they wanted to be better being explosive down the football field. This is one of those games where you want that to come to fruition because, look, I got a ton of respect for this Clemson defense. I don't think Georgia, although they moved the football on pretty much everybody last year, I don't think Georgia just has their way on the offensive side of the football. Now, I have more confidence in Georgia than I do Clemson to move the football on two elite defenses. That being said, I think explosive plays could win you this football game. And so when you do get those looks against those young cornerbacks, potentially true freshman cornerbacks, not only can you challenge the communication in the back end, can you just win your one-on-one matchups with guys like London Humphreys or Colby Young or maybe, even a guy like Arian Smith or Dylan Bell? I mean, there are some man beaters in this wide receiver room. That's kind of what I'm looking for. And I think lastly, play the game on your terms. And this is, you talk about why, if I were to sum up why Georgia has won as much as they've had the last 3 to 4 years, I think it's probably because of this reason. When you have the better line of scrimmage play against almost every single football team that you play, you control how the game is played. If a team wants to run tempo, which Clemson is going to want to run on offense, you can stop them from running tempo by just controlling the time possession, running the football effectively, staying on schedule. How do you want to play this game and go play the game on your football terms? That's probably one of the things that you're looking for at Georgia. When Georgia gets beat, which again has happened once in the last 2 years, it was because Alabama kind of got after them on the line of scrimmage and Georgia kind of fell out of their control to play the game on their terms. I think Georgia specifically against I have more respect for Clemson's offensive line than a lot of national media analysts do. If Georgia wants to win this football game, you want to play the game on your terms. You want to control the time possession, take that opportunity for Clemson to run tempo kind of out of this football game. Those are my couple keys for Georgia against Clemson. I think this is going to be a really fun game. Got a lot of respect for Clemson. Obviously, Georgia's my number one team coming into the 2024 season. We'll recap this game after it's played. We'll close it out there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all